Hey everyone, Dr. Messa here with this week's weekly facilitation. So today I'll be talking about the Reason and Kimball article and the AASCNU article that we read for this week. I'll be sharing what I think are the most important components of these articles, as well as modeling the facilitation assignment for you. I'm posting this in two places, both in the week 1 folder as well as in the discussion board. When you post your articles, your videos, please post them in the discussion board for that week. Okay, let's get started with the articles. So we read Reason and Kimball's article where they talk about the reflection and action model, as well as the AASCNU Top 10 Higher Ed State Policy Issues. So let's take the Reason and Kimball article first. They talk about the reflection and action model for practitioners in higher education. I think this is a really important model that we should all understand, and I'm going to walk through how I understand it and then encourage you in the discussion board to talk through how you understand it and would apply it to your professional practice. So first and foremost, they say we have formal theory. And formal theory has been translated for us as practitioners into the Council for the Advancement of Standards in terms of their characteristics of individual excellence for professional practice. There also it exists in the ACPA and NASPA competencies for professional practice. So I'm going to talk about this a little bit in terms of the characteristics of individual excellence. I use this to model my behavior in the work that I do, and some of those competencies for individual excellence include that I understand and respect similarities and differences of people in my institutional environment. Also, those include that I possess the appropriate knowledge of relevant theories, literature, and philosophies on which to base informed professional practice, and I understand and support the responsibility of the institution for enhancing the collegiate experience for all students. There are a number of others, and I've posted the complete list so you can follow along using that in the discussion board. But these are really important for me, and so I use those in my daily practice and how I seek to understand affordability of the students that I serve. And in terms of understanding my own institution, I understand the demographic characteristics, I understand my president's expectations, I understand my vice president's expectations, I understand the expectations of the other vice presidents with whom I work, and all of that for me, coupled with the formal theory, creates this new informal theory, and that informal theory is how I behave and how I work and how I develop policies for my units, how I develop rate structures for my units, and how I develop the strategic plan for my units. So I hope that makes sense. As an example, when I am working in committees to understand meal plan rates and parking rates, I understand and try to create an experience that will be excellent for all of the students that I serve. And I do that within a framework of affordability because I understand the demographic characteristics of my students. I understand that a number of students are on Pell Grants, and I understand a number of students are first time in college. So I think about all of those things deeply, as well as I understand my president's expectation that students will have an excellent experience and her standards of quality in our food service program. All of those things are really important to me and impact how I behave and how I interact with students. So I encourage you, as you hear my example, to think about your work and your future work as higher education and leaders in higher education, and think about how you would adapt this reflection and action model to your work. So transitioning now to the AASCNU policy brief. I really focused on 3 key components in this article and the big issues facing higher education. I looked at affordability, state funding for higher education, as well as higher education is this important contributor to the workforce. I think all of those are related. I found 2 articles in the Chronicle of Higher Education that helped me make sense of these articles and understand them better. So, in particular, the AASCNU article talks about the concerns that are facing higher education in terms of state funding and the continued conversation around how states are funding higher education less. It's related, I think, to this notion of affordability and who pays for higher education and whether higher education is a public good or a private good. Now, that is also related to growth in state population for students entering higher education, because certainly the more students you have in an institution, the more impact you're going to have on buildings, infrastructure, etc. And so that also impacts the cost. So, as you think about your future career and as a leader in higher education, I ask that you think about how you might respond to questions about affordability, especially with the lens of rising costs to pay employees, increased costs to provide infrastructure, especially as more and more students are attending our state colleges, and also how we create multiple paths into higher education. So those were related to the articles that I found. One that I found in the Chronicle of Higher Education centered on how state funding and how states are spending less on higher education and more on things like K through 12 education, which are clearly public goods in their minds. In particular, the example from this article noted that $1 more in per capita welfare spending equated to $2.44 less per student for higher education funding. So, the researcher argued that this reduction in state funding may be related to public perceptions about how higher education is spending its money. That's an important question and one we need to think about as leaders. Second, the article I found next centered on the legendary California Master Plan for higher education and how it might need to be revamped to address the current state of California higher education and its future. This 6 decades old plan was legendary in that it laid a grand framework for higher education in the state of California. 1, it documented how the intent of California was to provide quality education to the masses, and also those institutions were to produce research that advanced the good of society. It's important to think about what was happening in the U.S. at the time that the California Master Plan was created. It was created in the 1960s during a period in which higher education was viewed as a public good. We were in the space race, and higher education was going to provide advances in technology and in science that were going to make the world a better place to live. And in fact, it was already doing that. If you look at the impact higher education had during World War II, after the GI Bill, etc., it was doing this. And so there was a need and a will from the public to invest in public higher education. However, a number of challenges faced higher education, and in particular California. This California plan was impacted by legislation. Then it was hard for students to transfer from community colleges to universities, so the community colleges were becoming overcrowded. Also, state growth and a need for an educated workforce, so higher education was really burgeoning at the seams. Also, this plan was very grand, but it was light on details, and it has not been adjusted to accommodate state needs. Also, the state university system is fragmented. For a period of time, there was a governing board that governed all of higher education in the state of California, but it had been disbanded, and so the state university system, the UC system, and community colleges became siloed. So, Many are arguing there is a need for a new state master plan, and I think this can be extrapolated into a master plan writ large for the purpose of higher education. And is it a public good or a private good? So I selected this article because it seemed to address a lot of the complex issues in the policy brief that we read. So within the current challenges facing California, you have many of the current issues that all of our states are facing in terms of affordability, in terms of this question of public good versus private good, this notion of contributing and training the workforce, and this notion of how much and who should pay for what in higher education. It's hard to explain to folks all of these complicated issues, but it is our job as leaders in higher education. So think about for your posting for this week in the discussion board, as you prepare for your role as a future leader in higher education and student affairs, what strategies would you use to understand and explain these complicated issues to your president, to your board, to community members, and to students? I hope you have a great week, and I hope you enjoyed this week's readings. I'll post the Council for the Advancement of Standards link in the discussion board, as well as my 2 articles. I hope you enjoy them, and I look forward to reading your responses. Take care, everyone. See you next week. Bye.